Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. And guess what? 2024 is already almost over as of this video's release. And honestly, it's still kind of hard to believe this whole year has passed now. To me, it still feels like yesterday when the final Booster Course Pass wave got announced. But yeah, this has been a huge year for me, with plenty of downs but also plenty of ups as well. When I first started this YouTube channel 6 years ago, I never would have imagined it would be all the way up at 9,000 subscribers now, but hey, here we are, and I couldn't be more thankful for you all. I hope you've all tremendously enjoyed my content this year so far, and here's hoping for an even better 2025, when we're finally getting the Switch 2 hopefully. But before that happens, let's first try to end off this year on a good note. Today, we are finally going to be ranking all 24 cups in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This is a video that I've promised for way too long to actually come. I teased it indirectly in 2022 when I ranked the cups of Mario Kart DS, Wii and 7, and I also wrote the script for it back in March when the Booster Course Pass was over, but I wasn't satisfied with it. But now I finally had the energy to finish it. I think it goes without saying how much Mario Kart 8 Deluxe means to me. I have the Booster Course Pass to thank for where I am now, and it's also how most of you guys initially found my channel. So as a thanks for all of the support over the years, here's my New Year's gift to you all. This ranking will be largely based around two factors. One, how good are the tracks in each cup? Probably the most important thing. If they're not fun, then neither is the cup. But also how much I like the order. Because a cup isn't just a collection of tracks, it's a journey in and of itself, with a beginning and an end, just like this year was. And I like having a natural progression in my Mario Kart cups. But yeah, so with all of that being said, let's finally get started. Triforce Cup. Why did you have to be so weird? Yeah, so perhaps unsurprisingly, my least favorite Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Cup is easily the Triforce Cup, by a pretty wide margin as well. Because guess what? This one fails on both merits I brought up. Already, it starts off pretty unremarkably with Wii Wario's Gold Mine, and normally this would make me very happy, as the original track is one of my favorites of all time. But this remake is just completely disappointing, as they not only took out all of the difficulty, but the whole track just feels kinda dark and dystopian now, compared to how energetic it was in Wii. And after that, there's... Nintendo? Why? Why did you put a Rainbow Road in the second slot? I get they wanted to make the retros come before the nitros for these DLC cups, but sometimes I think it's necessary to break the pattern, because it feels completely wrong to have this archetype be so early. It's not even like they picked a good one anyways, as SNES Rainbow Road is not only flat and repetitive, but we just had it in Mario Kart 7, so it comes across more like filler to pad out the cup. And Ice Ice Outpost right after isn't much better either. The music is beautiful, but the gameplay is so wasted because the whole track is just these two barely changing roads for the whole time. Thankfully, it does pick up again with Hyrule Circuit, which is one of the most interesting and engaging crossover tracks of the bunch, but by this point it's kinda late to salvage the cup, which so far has been nothing but disappointing. So yeah, overall, I really don't have much nice things to say about this selection. The order feels wrong, 3 out of 4 tracks are boring, so even though I love Hyrule Circuit, I'm gonna have to give it F tier. There's just not a single scenario I can see myself putting through this. Next up, not much better, is the, Special Cup. The epic finale to the base game. Not. Nowadays, it's the Star and Lightning Cups that leave a better final impression. You know you've kind of royally messed up when the standout course isn't your obligatory Bowser Castle or Rainbow Road, but rather the first track, which in this case is Cloud Top Cruise. And it's admittedly pretty epic. Not my favorite thing ever, but I love how beautiful yet dangerous it is, preparing you for the rest of the cup. But then we immediately dip down with bone-dry dunes. It's ugly, barren, and super frustrating with all the sudden sharp turns. It's not even that I'm bad at it, it just flows really unnaturally. But how about Bowser's Castle and Rainbow Road? Surely those blow away, right? Yeah, no. Bowser's Castle is just all style and no substance. It tries so hard to be all edgy and chaotic, with the anti-gravity twisting around, but it feels surprisingly underwhelming, as there aren't a lot of elements. Just this huge slow Bowser statue halfway through. And Rainbow Road is, fine. The space station is kinda unique, and I like the bit at the end where you can switch between lanes, but there's just one problem: there's no rainbow here. Just ugly metal road with desaturated rainbow colors. It really sucks out a lot of the magic when everything is just artificial. Overall, the Special Cup feels like they knew the game would technically end on the Lightning Cup anyway, so they put all the effort into that and then tried the bare minimum here. And that's sad. It's like it exists only because it has to, and while it has a better flow than the Triforce Cup, it's still really kind of disappointing. So D tier. Lastly, for our final bad cup, we have the Egg Cup. Yeah, DLC Pack 1 was honestly just kinda mid overall. And this one in particular is interesting because it's the only Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Cup without a single glider section. So that's a bad sign. Thankfully, the tracks aren't unlikably bad like in the previous two cups, but they're still fairly forgettable to me, mostly. Yoshi Circuit is a fine track, having you drive around the shape of a Yoshi. Too bad it visually looks like any other circuit track. And Excite Bike Arena is just an over-glorified ramp oval. I don't care that there's 200 randomized layouts, because they all feel exactly the same, and it gets old after just one lap. And honestly, Mute City is kinda overhyped as well. Sure, I love F-Zero as much as anyone else, but you're just speeding past dash panels. That's all it has. And while that worked for F-Zero, I expect a little more from a Mario Kart track. Once again though, there is that one track that's far better than the rest, and this time it's Dragon Driftway. I love the Chinese theming and how you're driving on a statue of Gobblegut, and the whole layout is so smooth and twisty and I love it. Otherwise though, the Egg Cup is forgettable. It's not bad, and the weaker tracks are more interesting than in the previous cups, but I'm not exactly dying to play it. Especially because visually this cup is kinda ugly too. It's all just the desaturated greens and greys in these tracks. Or in Mute City's case, a toxic purple, and I prefer more vibrant colors in my Mario Kart tracks. So D tier, almost passable. Next up is the Banana Cup at number 21. From this point on, all of the cups on the list are at the very least above average. Not quite good yet, but serviceable. The Banana Cup is probably the most consistently average cup of all time. No joke, every single track here is just fine. No more, no less. Dry Desert is just your typical desert track, at least now that it took out everything interesting and added an oasis for some reason. Yeah, so much for Dry Desert. And Donut Plains 3 is a colorful, albeit straightforward SNES remake. Pretty beautiful, and a bit interesting with that broken bridge it has, but otherwise nothing much to write home about. And N64 Royal Raceway just exists. The only reason it was iconic originally was because you could drive up to Peach's castle. But you know, Nintendo hates fun. And now there's nothing interesting at all, besides the 63rd glider section. 3DS Sticky Jungle is definitely the highlight of this cup, and even then I'm fairly indifferent. On one hand, I don't really like Donkey Kong Country Returns. Actually, it's fine, don't worry Sir Musty. But I mean, it's a serviceable jungle track that's at least moderately prettier here than it was in 7. And it does kind of fit the Banana Cup. At least more so than the Special Cup. But yeah, overall, the Banana Cup is just fine. None of the tracks are bad, so I can't see any less for the cup. It's just nothing too memorable, so bottom of the C tier it is. Opening up the top 20 is the first Boosty Course Pass Cup on the list, which ironically enough is also the first one in-game. The Golden Dash Cup. And it's an awful first impression. In a weird way, it kind of encapsulates everything right and wrong with this DLC as a whole. It starts off on a strong note with Paris Promenade, which in my opinion was easily the best city track to open up this pass. It's simple, but still really charming with lots of split paths, and it introduces the arrow gimmick in a way that takes you by surprise, while still feeling naturally integrated. But then there's Toad Circuit. Okay, does this really need an explanation? But then it goes back up again with Choco Mountain, which is actually a surprisingly great remake for Wave 1 standards. It adds a few new elements, such as this expanded cave and new glider section, and the graphics are passable, unlike in the final track, Coconut Mall. Look, it's still Coconut Mall, so by proxy it's good enough, but I still can't forget what they did to it. The colors and new aesthetics are just so saturated and cartoony, and cars barely even pose a challenge now. And I don't mind cartoony, but Coconut Mall was a track that thrived on its realistic art style. It felt like you were in a real mall, which it doesn't now. Plus, it's a bit weird to have it as a cup finale, when the atmosphere is more welcoming than climactic. So yeah, the Golden Dash Cup. I don't like it that much, but it still has a majority of good tracks, so it's fine. And would you look at that, right after is the second Booster Course Pass Cup, the Lucky Cat Cup. This one largely has the same issues as the Golden Dash Cup, except it's substantially more inconsistent in quality, which does kinda wind up in its favor. Unfortunately, the city track here is not good though, because Tokyo Blur is just a blur. It's just a couple of roads and that's it. Why Nintendo? And Sky Garden ain't much better either. What they did to this track as a remake was completely disrespectful, and while by itself it's a passable course, it's still too short, easy and just forgettable. But the fact that both of these tracks are so short does lessen the negative impact they'd have on the cup, because while they're still kinda bad, at least they're over before we even start. And that way, the two great tracks here leave a much stronger impression. Shroom Ridge is ugly, I mean geez, what did you think? But it's still an incredibly soothing highway track in the mountains, with some genuinely fun turns to twist around on. Ninja Hideaway is literally one of my favorite courses of all time. I love everything about it, from the Japanese theming, all the shortcuts, as well as the huge focus on split paths. And unlike something like Ice Ice Outpost, the different paths actually feel different from each other. So yeah, the Lucky Cat Cup. Surprisingly fun at times. The inconsistency is still a pretty big problem, like with Wii's Banana Cup, but hey, it could be worse. So overall, another decent C-tier cup. Now, let's talk about the very first cup in the whole game for a change, the Mushroom Cup. In my opinion, easily one of the strongest mushroom cups the series has to offer, even if it's still only C-tier, but it's a decent first impression to Mario Kart 8. Already, Mario Kart Stadium is definitely one of the better opening tracks in the franchise. It's got a lot of energy, and it showcases both anti-gravity and gliding in ways that aren't too overwhelming. Unfortunately, Water Park is one of the most forgettable Mario Kart tracks ever, like, what even is there to it? But Sweet Sweet Canyon and Twomp Ruins both thankfully pick up the pace after. Unfortunately, all four tracks are also a bit too easy and straightforward for my liking, which yeah, it's fine for being a first cup, although it still makes me a bit disappointed, considering how crazy a lot of these track themes could have gone. But they're pleasant enough for the most part, and that's the Mushroom Cup's strength there. What it lacks in ambition, it makes up for being a perfectly likable starting cup. So while it doesn't hold a candle to what comes next, there's no major problems. Again, just okay. Well, looks like we're back to the Booster Course Pass already, this time with the Cherry Cup. If there's a word I had to use to describe this set of tracks, it would be wasted. Because while all of them, well except for one, are pretty good, they also have several avoidable problems that just make me sad thinking about. Los Angeles Laps is probably the most harmless one. It's a good city track with lots of varied areas and set pieces, but too bad we couldn't keep the sunset from Tordo. And speaking of sunsets, I think you know what the next track's problem is. The whole point of Sunset Wilds was that the sun went down each lap. But now we not only don't have that, but the layout is a shell of its former self as well now. Why couldn't we get Yoshi Desert instead? But on another note, Koopa Keep is actually unusually great despite its shortcomings. Because yes, I still hate that there's no electrical spinners, but it's still an incredibly fast-paced track in its own right. Partly thanks to the whole course being downscaled. And I love how it encourages you to take every speed boost there is. That said, Vancouver is a conflicting finale. Like, it's visually and thematically stunning, but why do we start on easily the most ambitious lap and then work our way down to nothing? The last two laps are so underwhelming, and it leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Like I said, all these tracks are still pretty good, mostly, so it's a fine cup overall. It's just that it leaves me on a disappointed note, and hence, it's another average cup. The Acorn Cup, like the Banana Cup before it, is one of the most consistent Mario Kart Cups ever. Although instead of the tracks being serviceable, they're all generally good enough. Except for DK Mountain. Good god, it is so visually inconsistent and so awkward to play. I used to give it the benefit of the doubt because of that gap shortcut, but honestly, no, it doesn't save it. The whole course was just not meant with this game's physics. And I hate how brake drifting is basically obligatory in 150cc. But everything else here, I can respect a ton at least. Daisy Circuit is a bit too simple to be a Wave 6 course, but it's still a charming little town track, with a beautiful sunset and some cool split paths. And Rome Avanti, while pretty basic as you mostly just drive on road and streets, is one of the most gorgeous city tracks in the entire game. And I love the foreboding and theatrical music it's got, as if it's building up for a big show. Even Deep Moray Trench is pretty intriguing with its underwater temple aesthetic. It would be even more cool if the first lap wasn't just an overglorified loop. But yeah, this is just a generally good collection of tracks that could have been beat there if we had no DK Mountain. But also if they swapped its place with Daisy Circuit. Like seriously, why does Daisy Circuit come after DK Mountain? Genuinely, who thought this was an acceptable order? But yeah, overall the Acorn Cup is just another Mario Kart Cup. It's decent, but pretty underwhelming, seeing as it was in the final DLC wave. Lastly, for our final C-tier cup, we have the Rock Cup. To be honest, I feel a bit bad about putting this one so low because it's definitely got a unique style to it, which I appreciate, as most of the tracks here have muted color schemes and unwelcoming autumn vibes. But the progression is a little all over the place. London Loop is definitely a good place to start off with. It's one of my favorite city tracks personally, for the rock music and loose chain jumps, and it sets a unique tone for the cup with its foggy morning atmosphere. But then it goes a little off the deep end already with Bull Lake. By itself, it's a fine track, albeit simple, but it feels a bit too sudden with its intense spookiness. Like there should be something a bit calmer after London first. And then Alpine passes the third slot?
No, Rock Mountain.
Not today, Bertrell. But yeah, Alpine Pass. You know, the track where you trek up a mountain with falling boulders, and has one of the most vigorous music tunes in the game. Why is this not the finale? Instead, that is Maple Treeway, the most calming course of the bunch. I mean, it's also the best one here, so it ends the cup on a good note, but it's oddly anticlimactic. Overall, all of the tracks are good, even if Bull Lake isn't mighty, and Alpine Pass is so unbelievably ugly, but the order really could have been better. And to some extent, I think the original Prefix Rock Cup was a bit better in some ways. And also, I know I just praised this aspect, but in all honesty, I'd also just rather play a cup where the vibes aren't dark and unpleasant. Still, it's okay. Anyways, now we can finally move on to the B tier and talk about some cups which I actually quite like a lot. They still have their issues, but the positives are quite a bit stronger than the drawbacks. Starting with Turnip Cup. Yeah, this one is probably going to be controversial, as it has not one but two universally hated tracks. And I won't sugarcoat it, Mario Circuit 3 is one of the most uninspired tracks ever. The raw layout isn't bad, but there are just no track elements outside of a couple of tight turns here and there. However, New York Minute isn't that bad. Sure, it's also very simple, but being a city track, the changing laps provide some variety at least, and unlike Tokyo, it's not completely devoid of elements. It's with its last two tracks, Calamar Desert and Waluigi Pinball, that it really gets to shine though. With Calamar Desert in particular being innovative, as you now actually drive through the train tunnels for the last two laps. And I mean, Waluigi Pinball is really good too. I've never been too big on it, as the actual pinball section is only relevant at the end, but it's still a cool concept, and this version in particular is probably my favorite one, thanks to the more vibrant colors. However, the main reason this cup is in the B tier though is because of the order of progression. I mean, think about it, you start off in New York on the east coast, then go to the Appalachian Mountains, before you take a train across the desert, where you finally reach your destination in Las Vegas. It was probably completely unintentional, but still, it's such a cool pattern that just makes me happy. Which barely salvages the Turnip Cup for me, even with its first two tracks being very boring. So yeah, B tier it is, barely. Next, the Flower Cup at number 13 is largely the same story as the last one when it comes to course quality. Unfortunately, Mario Circuit is one of the most boring tracks ever of its archetype, being just a figure 8 that twists upside down. However, Toad Harbor is a certified banger among simple tracks. The coastal vibes are super pleasant, and as an autistic guy, any train, even if it's a tram, is a huge win. Twisted Mansion is, I mean, it's okay. It's not really scary, and the underwater section is kinda boring, but I guess it's harmless. But oh boy, Shy Guy Falls is one of the coolest courses I've ever played. I mean, you drive up a waterfall, and if that wasn't enough, it's got one of the most upbeat and joyful music tracks I've ever heard in Mario Kart, as you go through these mountains. I love it. So while the Flower Cup is overall, once again, fairly inconsistent, it's inoffensive and really good where it does shine. Okay, this one is probably gonna be controversial. Opening up the top half of the list, we have the Shell Cup. Believe me, I was gonna put this one even higher initially. But honest to God, this is one of the most humbly nostalgic and beautiful selections of tracks I can go back to any day of the week. None of the courses here are particularly ambitious, but what they lack in difficulty, they make up in the charm. Stonks of it, in fact, and Moo Moo Meadows probably best exemplifies it. It's very simple and rather short, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit how lovable it is, from the gorgeous sunset to the almost melancholy music. And GBA Mario Circuit isn't half bad either. It's definitely the weak link of the cup, but even then it's completely harmless. But it only gets better with Cheap Cheap Beach, which is one of the most stunning and relaxing beach tracks ever, with lots of variety in the theme and gorgeous steel drum music. And finally, there's Toad's Turnpike. Yeah, I know, everybody hates it for being too easy, but honestly, the appeal of it was never the challenge, even if it still was a nice bonus. It was the fact that you were driving calmly on a motorway in the middle of the night. And while it doesn't quite feel as psychedelic as the original version, it's still a relaxing journey. So yeah, overall, I think the Shell Cup is an underrated gem that's been mistreated for too long by fans. It's not exactly amazing, so it doesn't get any higher, but man, it deserves a better reputation. The Propeller Cup is probably the one I have the absolute least to say about. It's a Mario Kart Cup, with a touch of Australia and the sky, but it's also an incredibly solid experience, that solidified my expectations for the future of the Boosted Course Pass. As Sydney Sprint was probably the first great city track we got. It's not as ambitious as what came after, in fact there's not even any road hazards, but the music and layout all flow so immaculately that it makes for an iconic ride. And likewise, Snowland was the first good and in my opinion, still best GBA remake from this pass. It's simple, but it's just got such a cheerful atmosphere, in addition to some crazy shortcuts. And Mushroom Gorge, despite being another Play-Doh track visually, exceeds all odds and takes the best elements from each previous version of the track, making an already fun track even better. Alas, the Propeller Cup can't get into the A tier because of Sky High Sunday, but even so, that track is still pretty overheated. Because despite being an oval, it's way more packed than other tracks of this type, with all the split paths and the floaty physics giving it some personality. So yeah, I really like the Propeller Cup. There's some nostalgia involved in it, as I still remember when I played Wave 2 for the first time, but I also just really respect it for being the first really good Boosted Course Pass Cup. So a very solid B tier overall. The Boomerang Cup is one that I always look back on fondly, but then when I actually play it and look it over, I realize it's not as amazing as I always thought. But even so, this is personally one of the most unique cups in my opinion. It takes a lot of bold risks. Already, Bangkok Rush is one of my favorite city tracks of all time. I get it, they removed a lot of elements from the tour version, but I don't know, it still has more unique vibes than the other ones. What's with the orange sunset and bustling markets. GCN Waluigi Stadium admittedly looked absolutely amazing when it was first revealed, not just in the graphical department, but also thanks to the brand new split paths you could take with the half pipes. But unfortunately, as a remake, I also find it a bit too easy and whimsical now, particularly with the straightaway, but it's still really good. Why can't I like Singapore Speedway too? I mean, it has the style, and I love the bombastic atmosphere. In fact, the whole final lap is masterfully crafted, but the first two laps are just so simple and short and boring. But you know, this cup also has DS Mario Circuit. On its own, it's pretty good, being arguably the hardest Mario Circuit to date, with way more track elements than usual. But because I predicted it and it's my whole personality now, it puts the cup at an easy S tier. Airship Fortress can cope and seethe. But yeah, the Boomerang Cup is good. Wacky, but the good kind of wacky. And at number 9, we have the Crossing Cup. Finally we're back at the bonus cups. This was part of the second DLC pack, back when Mario Kart 8 was still on the Wii U. And already I think it's a major improvement in almost every way over the Egg and Triforce Cups, because for one, the tracks pop out way more in theme and creativity. Even Baby Park, the opening course. Normally I'm not too big on this track, it's just a short oval you loop 7 times, but they really nailed the chaotic atmosphere in this version. So I think it's really fun. And Cheeseland is actually my favorite retro course in the entire game, barring only Wii Rainbow Road. mode. Sure, the skybox is less magical than it was on GBA, but I don't care. It still feels like a cheese canyon, which is cool enough in its own right, if the 2 game-breaking shortcuts weren't already so. And the final 2 tracks are good enough as well. Wildwoods is a bit short, but it's still got a very enchanting and beautiful theme, with the whole treetop town. And Animal Crossing has 4 different variants, each based on a season. As a course, I don't care that much for it. I think it's way too simple and easygoing, but when you factor in the different variants, which you can actually predetermine before the race starts, it adds a whole new dimension to playing this cup, as each experience will always end differently. If only Sunset Wilds did something like this too. Yeah, overall the Crossing Cup is really good. It could be greater, but it's still got 1 amazing track and 3 other pretty good ones. So close to A tier. Anyways, with the B tier finished, now we can finally go on over to the A tier cups, and these next few ones are great. Not quite spotless, but we're getting there. Starting with the Fruit Cup. This is another one of those inoffensive cups where all of the tracks are at least pleasant. But unlike other similar instances like the Shell Cup, this time they're also really ambitious actually. You'd think Wave 4 would take a slight step back after Wave 3 was kind of the finale to the first half of the DLC, but while it does that, it does so without sacrificing quality. Just look at Amsterdam Drift for example. On one hand, it's got a beautifully euphoric morning atmosphere that gets me in the mood for a new day. But on another hand, it's also one of the twistiest city tracks layout-wise, with tons of sharp turns and variety in set pieces. Even Riverside Park, which is clearly the weak link here, is still charming enough as a GBA remake, with all the adorable Tuis walking around. DK Snowboard Cross is, in my opinion, a slight downgrade from the original as the jump physics aren't as dramatic as in Wii, but it's still a really solid track where you snowboard down a mountain. And Yoshi's Island is just amazing for every reason imaginable. It's easily the best crossover track we've ever had, and it's one of the few courses in the Booster Course pass that nails the cartoony aesthetic, as the original Yoshi's Island was already kind of that, so it feels faithful. I love all the small references, and they're all incorporated really well into the track design. So yeah, the Fruit Cup. No doubt this is a great one, even if the next few ones feel a bit more bold. The Moon Cup probably wouldn't be this high on the list if we were purely discussing course quality, because admittedly it's kinda mixed in this regard, as you'll soon see. But as the finale to the first half of this DLC, it leaves a really satisfying mark, starting with one of the hardest city tracks, Berlin Byways. The theming was almost as boring as Tokyo Blur, but the addition of cars on the road and creative implementation of landmarks does it so much more justice, and that's not to mention the music being one of the catchiest in all of Mario Kart. And Peach Gardens knocked all expectations out of the park. It's already a soothing and beautiful track as it is, but then the final lap as you're going backwards, it was perfect. And actually, I don't mind Merry Mountain's inclusion here, because again, sure, by itself it's painfully average, especially the last strip, but it kinda works as a preparation for Rainbow Road, with its gorgeous holiday theming. And speaking of which, 3DS Rainbow Road is only one of the most ambitious Rainbow Roads ever made. So yeah, overall, even though the Moon Cup isn't too consistent, it's an epic journey nevertheless that I always come back to. The Feather Cup, however, is where we're really starting to see the great tracks in the majority, and not just good. Right off the bat, it opens up with Athens Dash, which is easily one of the most unique city tracks in the whole pass. The fact that it takes place entirely outside of town, and instead on the mountainous Acropolis, gives it a much more distinctive and adventurous feel. And even though I wish there was a little more to it than that, I still immensely respect it for being a thrilling introduction. Daisy Cruiser was probably the least exciting track in the whole DLC, but that doesn't make it bad. You're racing inside a cruise ship for Christ's sake, and that's amazing. And Squeaky Clean Sprint needs no introduction at all. It's just Moonview Highway that barely holds it back. Unlike the other 3 tracks, this one is very basic in theme. And unlike Toad's Turnpike, another traffic track, the whole point of this was the difficulty. Now there's like, what, 7 cars in total? But because of how great the other 3 tracks are, I have to give this cup the benefit of the doubt, because I still do love my time on it. And it's kinda insane how much higher in quality it is than the other Wave 5 cup, so this is another solid A tier. The Star Cup, opening up the top 5, used to actually be my favorite Mario Kart Cup of all time. At least 10 years ago, because back then I was a huge Sunshine Airport fanboy. Now it's the one thing keeping this selection out of the S tier. It's still a good-ish track, with an inviting atmosphere, but I can't help but find it too easy as well as too simple for what it could be. I mean, all you really do is just drive through some planes, in like 5 seconds in a terminal, and also on whatever this platform is supposed to be. Yeah, it's kinda wasted. Thankfully, the other 3 courses are all some of my favorites this game has to offer. Because for one, Dolphin Shoals is based on dolphins, my favorite animal. Good job. And also, I like the trickable moray eel and epic saxophone music. Anyways, as with a lot of other cups, it's with its final 2 tracks where it truly gets to shine, with Electrodrome and Mount Wario. Obviously, Mount Wario speaks for itself. It's easily the best section track in the entire series, and improves on the concept first seen in Mario Kart 7. Every section is super fun to traverse, and it truly feels like an epic race down to the base of the mountain. And Electrodrome might just have the greatest theme in any Mario Kart track. Yeah, the layout isn't anything too special, but the music and visuals just fill me up with so much joy and energy. How can you say no to it? I love the Star Cup, and I wanted so deeply to love it even more. But you know what? Top of A tier is still amazing. And with that, we finally only have 1 tier left to talk about, the S tier. These 4 cups are all some of the greatest collections of Mario Kart courses I've ever played, with every track being either excellent or at worst still really good. Opening up with the Leaf Cup here. By the Shell and Banana Cups, I thought the retro tracks in this game were cool enough. They were visually stunning, although still fairly simple. But all of that changed here, because DS Wario Stadium, oh my god. They took one of the most basic and irrelevant stadium tracks out there and completely flipped it on itself. Multiple sections look and play almost entirely differently, and I love how much more unique this track is now, even if they sacrificed the night sky. And GCN Sherbet Land? Again, I hated this track on Double Dash. It was slippery, annoying, and just kinda plain in general. But not only are the ice physics way more manageable here, but they added entire new roads to the layout if you fall off the track. Hello? Base Department? Yeah, I really dig it. Melody Motorway is a slight downgrade from the original, as the bouncing notes don't jump twice as fast on the last lap anymore, but it's such a trivial complaint for what is otherwise a banging trek through an instrument highway. And as you might have guessed, I love Yoshi Valley too. I don't care that the shortest path is much easier to traverse now. The fact that you still have so many split paths to pick from is such a cool concept from a Mario Kart track. And so what if the other roads are slower? There's more to life than just winning. And even then, I still like the climactic vibes of this one. Honestly, I was thinking of putting the Leaf Cup even higher while writing this section, because all these tracks are great. But actually, that's exactly why it's only 4. Because while all of these tracks are great, they're not quite as unique as what's coming next, besides Music Park. You'll see. Still, I love the Leaf Cup, and it's an easy S tier. Finally, we say goodbye to the last of the Booster Course Pass cups on the list, with the Spiny Cup opening up the top 3, and how fitting that it's also the last one in-game. This one not only has the least troublesome track selection, but it also doubles as a near perfect send-off to not just the Booster Course Pass, but even Mario Kart 8 Deluxe as a whole. Starting off, Madrid Drive is easily the best city track we've got in this game. It's a bit on the easy side, but the sheer variety of different locations and hazards makes it by far the most engaging one to drive on. And 3DS Rosalina's Ice World is one of the most beautiful tracks in the series. Not only is it genuinely challenging with its hilariously broken half-pipes, but the melancholy and frigid atmosphere makes it one of the most unique feeling tracks out there. And I love how it makes me almost emotional with its piano music. Actually, SNES Bowser Castle 3 is the only reason this cup isn't number 1. Because yeah, while it's definitely the coolest SNES remake we've ever had in Mario Kart, it's still very much a track on the short side, that feels simple outside the anti-gravity editions. And this would probably feel less wrong if it wasn't the penultimate track of the game. Luckily, there's Wii Rainbow Road though, and it doesn't need an introduction. What a beautiful final challenge to end off the DLC with. With 3 literal masterpieces, this cup really did have a chance at being my favorite cup. But you know, at this point on, the quality is getting so high in these tracks, but it's only these minuscule differences that decide a winner. Still a masterful S tier cup. The Bell Cup was, for the longest possible time, the last cup we had in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, as part of the original Wii U DLC. And even though I'm more happy with the Spinny Cup for that purpose now, I still have to admit that this one pulled it off in its own right. It's easily the most consistently great of the 4 bonus cups, with all tracks being incredibly creative for even this game's standards. The worst one is 3DS Koopa City. And while it can be slightly frustrating with all its sharp turns and slippery road, it's very much a fair challenge with brake drifting, and so it doesn't detract from the gorgeous cityscape and uplifting music. And GBA Ribbon Road is just the biggest glow up ever of a retro track. I still prefer Cheese Land in this game, but come on, it's like comparing gold with platinum. It's so inventive, transforming the track into a child's bedroom, and feels like a different track in all the best ways possible. And it only continues to go up, as Super Bell Subway is my favorite track overall in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Again, I love trains, and not only are they a fun set piece here, with all the split paths and the ability to drive on top of them, but I also love all the small references hidden throughout the race, as it makes the track feel more alive. And even though I'm not quite as big on Big Blue as everyone else, I still have to admit that this at least is an F-Zero track done right, unlike Mute City, with more set pieces than just speed boosts, and the fact that it's a section track gives the developers much more freedom to make it go all out. And it was a great finale to leave us on for 7 years. Overall, the Bell Cup really is one of the greatest Mario Kart Cups of all time. It's just that my favorite one is actually almost completely perfect. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Lightning Cup. Honestly, there really was no other choice. If you ask me, the Lightning Cup in this game is the only one to have all 4 of its tracks be solid S tiers. The last 2 cups got close, but alas. All 4 of these are engaging gameplay-wise and employ some of the wackiest and most innovative course ideas I've ever seen for Mario Kart tracks. Even in as early as the first course, Tick-Tock Clock. I mean dude, you're racing inside a giant clock. Admittedly, I wasn't too big on this track in Mario Kart DS, as the limitations of that system made the track feel barren, but this remake feels so much more vibrant in every way. And it doesn't get worse. Piranha Plant Pipeway was already one of my favorite Mario Kart 7 tracks, having you race through the underground sewers of 1-2, and I could not have asked for a better remake. Not only does the color scheme feel much more natural, but I especially love what it did to the final underwater section. It feels so big now compared to 7's more cramped uptake. And Grumble Volcano, oh my god. This may have been one of the least changed retro tracks, as it only adds 2 new glider ramps, but again, it was already one of the coolest tracks originally, having the road slowly crumble away over the course of the race. It's super dynamic, and despite its controversies, I still love N64 Rainbow Road in this game. Sure, it's slightly short, but let's not get too spoiled. And either way, I don't really mind the length that much. It's still a beautiful send-off to what was originally the last cup of Mario Kart 8, with the challenge, vibes, and music all leaving you on a satisfying note. So without a doubt, the Lightning Cup isn't just the best Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Cup, but arguably my favorite cup of all time, and it's gonna be hard to ever top it. But hey, maybe Mario Kart X will surprise me. Until then. And that, my friends, is my full ranking of all the cups in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I hope you all enjoyed watching this New Year's Eve special of mine. It is quite possibly the most requested video I've ever had on the channel, and unfortunately, it was also one of the hardest for me to make as well. Not so much for the ranking itself per se, that part was easy, but it was just hard to figure out the commentary I should add, because if I'm too descriptive, the video is gonna get too long, since it's 96 tracks we're talking about here. But I still couldn't be too surface level, otherwise that would make for a fairly unengaging list. And it's part of why this video took so long for me to finish. It was first gonna come last year, then March, but in the end I settled for this. Hopefully it was a fun ranking though. And now we just wait for the next Mario Kart game, which is hopefully coming next year. With all of that being said now, Happy New Year everyone, and go out and enjoy the very last of 2024. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for even more videos next year. Until next time.